Welcome to the Woman Angler and Adventurer Podcast, inspiring real women with a passion for fishing and the outdoors to go get their adventure on. Now, here's your host, Master Captain Angie Scott.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Woman Angler and Adventurer Podcast. I'm your host, Angie Scott, wrapping up Women in Sports Month. This week with a fun conversation with Crappie Hippie John King from the Fish Nerds podcast and the new Lure Love podcast, where he actually interviewed me and we dig into competitive bass fishing specifically and go over stuff like some of my favorite go-to baits, how I make certain decisions, things like that. It was a super fun conversation, and John was kind enough to edit this together for the show this week. And it will be featured on his show sometime in the near future. But thank you so much, John. And if you guys have not checked out the Fish Nerds podcast with Clay Myers or the Lure Love podcast with Tim Bete and John King, I highly recommend giving them a listen. Also, a shout out to John for his Glasswater angling lures, which are all lead-free. To help with the environment. Check out Glasswater Angling. I'll put links to all these things in the show notes for this episode. I also just recently did a fun skit with John on the Lure Love podcast that should give you a good chuckle or two, so be on the lookout for that. All right, well, let's get into this conversation, and hopefully you maybe learn a little bit about bass fishing tournaments, and enjoy. I won't be afraid to say it was a wacky rig Senko. I just won't go into the details.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, everybody. This is Crappie Hippie, and I'm here with a very, very special person and a good friend that I have yet to meet, but I know her from social media. I know her from podcasting, and I also follow her on the tournament trail. Angie, tell us who you are.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me on, John. I hope we get to meet soon in person someday, but I host the Woman Angler and Adventure podcast, but I also fish the LBA, which is the Lady Bass Anglers Association Women's Pro Bass Tour. Started fishing that last year as a boater, and this is my second year. So,
okay, real quick. Some people don't know why a boater, and then what's the other person called a co? Explain that real quick for us, would you please?
Yeah, so, different tournament trails are set up a little differently. With the LBAA, we have what we call a pro and a co. And the pro is the one that owns the boat and runs the boat. And then the co fishes from the back of the boat. And I also fish with Team Nashville Bassmasters. And that's a little different in that you have a boater and a non-boater. And so, again, kind of same thing, except with them, you're fishing as a team. So instead of in the LBA, the pros compete against other pros and the co's are competing against other co's. And with the team tournaments, you fish together. So you're all your fish, your total limit of 5 kind of combined together as a team, which is a nice way to go for people, I think, who are just getting into it, because you learn a lot that way because you're really trying to teach each other as you're fishing together as a team.
Fantastic. Well, I'd heard of these different sorts of organizational schemes when it comes to tournaments. I just wanted to make sure I had it straight on what you were doing. It's really, really interesting, and you're doing really, really well right off the bat this year. 6th place at Hubbard, got your PB. Well done. I'm just rooting for you all every inch of the way. I'm going to take some liberty here. I want to guess. Just let me guess, okay? We did a thing on go-to baits, Tim and I, on the last show, and we want to do a little thing on tournament fishers because they buy a lot of baits. They think about baits a lot. You ever dream about baits, Angie?
I'm sure I do.
So if we hooked you up to some sort of brain analyzer graph sort of thing, it would draw a picture of a Senko as your thought process waves go through the night. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well then, okay. So I'm going to guess some of your tournament go-to baits or just go-to baits period as a fisher. And I'm pretty sure number one is a Senko.
Yep.
I'm going to put, right. Yeah, how about lipless crankbait?
I don't fish a lipless crankbait a whole lot. Now, I've got a whole tray of them, and I definitely have given it a try here early in the year. That is not really one of my higher
Okay.
confidence baits.
All right. Well, then if Lucy was here, she'd buzz me. So, okay. So, Al's goldfish.
I always have an Al's goldfish tied on. If for nothing else, if I see just a bunch of fish busting the surface, I'm going to be throwing that Al's goldfish in that school.
Heck yes. Good strategy. Okay. And then I know you like those flapping jack crawdad baits.
Yeah, I do have a go-to crawdad style bait. It's a Gambler Flappy Daddy that was introduced to me by Barbara Harris. And so I typically have one of those tied on for sure.
And following your media on the tournament there in Nashville, I heard you went out and learned to use a jerkbait and use jerkbait pretty good now. So I'm going to say jerkbait for my last guess.
Yeah. Again, especially like this time of year, I know, all the research I've done, jerkbaits tend to be a pretty good go-to. So I really wanted to learn how to fish it right, use the right technique. And I did that. I used it all day long and feel like I've got it down pretty good now. I've caught a bunch of fish on it. So building up my confidence there. And I used it part of the day in the tournament here in Nashville, caught a bunch of short fish, and ended up being the theme of the day for pretty much everybody. So it wasn't just me. The bigger fish were kind of more elusive, I guess, for us that day, but, still catching fish on it. So I feel pretty good about a jerkbait now.
Hey, a bass of any size can give you confidence in a bait. Believe me, when I'm out testing a bait, especially if it's one of mine and I get any kind of hit, I'm loving it. I'm just learning to use a jerkbait too, but I'm quite sure you're picking it up quicker than me. But yeah, there's just something about a jerkbait in the springtime that it just really, really works. So I'm glad you've already kind of gotten a way in and feel comfortable with it, because a lot of people are doing a lot of good things, catching a lot of bass on jerkbaits. Yeah. All right. So tell me, how many rods do you typically rig up before a tournament? How many are laying there on Angie Scott's boat deck waiting to be grabbed?
Well, so I'm super blessed to be sponsored by St. Croix Rods, and they actually added me to their rod loaner program this last year. And so I've kind of built up my arsenal of St. Croix over the past several years. And I typically have probably about 15 rods in the box ready to go. And I'll probably lay out probably 8 to 10 rods on the deck. And, I may only use 3 or 4, but it's nice to have those options ready to go. And oftentimes too, like if I think I'm going to be fishing a certain type of setup, I may have like 2 or 3 of those tied on just in case, something happens, I get hung up or whatever, and I can just grab the next one and not have to waste time re-rigging.
Oh, it's a brilliant strategy. And I mean, I've seen the pros. I do it too. I mean, regular fishers, anything. You don't want to go in there and screw up that spot. You just want to grab another rod and throw in there, and with the same or similar bait. Heck yes, way to go. That's it. All right. Now, see, St. Croix, huh? Because, I had a rod called a St. Crook. I guess I didn't read the label well enough before I bought it. Anyway, it broke on the second trip. So you got to go with the real thing and wear your glasses when you buy. What are the main characteristics of a lure that earns itself a spot in that initial tournament lineup? I mean, are we talking versatility, ease of use, familiarity, confidence born on past experience, or is it just simply your lucky lure? Talk to me, Ange. Combination of these, or which one of these aspects stands out the most?
Definitely a combination, but confidence for me stands out the most. Before any given tournament, I'm going to do a bunch of research and try to figure out what type of baits are probably going to work the best in whatever that situation might be. I'm going to pick out which one of those that I have the most confidence in personally and kind of lean on that as I go into the tournament and, of course, in practice. Now, so let's talk about Ray Hubbard just a little bit. This was my second year fishing Ray Hubbard in March. And, last year I had a lot of stuff going on, brand new boat, like literally only ran it like 10 minutes locally before I got down to Dallas. So I had some issues still to work out with that. And I just had, really no idea what was going on there down at Hubbard. This year, I had a couple ideas in mind, and I knew from last year's experience that Ray Hubbard fishes really, really small, even though it's a fairly good sized lake, just because there's, only so many places you can go. And I thought my thought process was the co-anglers from the back of the boat tend to do really well on our tour fishing these wacky rig Senkos. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to be going in behind a lot of boats probably during this tournament. And I'm like, I'm going to throw a wacky rig Senko and see how I do. And it worked out really well for me, actually. So
whoa. How, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Andrew. I really am. But how well? How well? Come on, tell us. How well did it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I caught a lot of fish in practice and one keeper in the morning on tournament day, but then I got my personal best in the last hour going in behind somebody, throwing that wacky rig Senko.
I was all ready to scold you for following her around, but how many back in line were you before you got to go down the
She was
lane?
Actually behind me. In the lineup. And then I knew I was going to go into the marina, and I didn't care how many people were in there.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't afraid to go behind anybody.
Right.
But there wasn't as many as I thought. And so I just went along the one wall, and Pam was on the outside of it. And so, like I said, we were mirror imaging each other going down this wall. And all of a sudden I saw her catch her first keeper, and I was like, dang.
But you got yours in that spot, right? Is that right? Or
I got my first keeper in that marina, but on the other wall.
Oh, okay. But then but where'd you get the slob though? Where'd you get your PB?
Yeah, where Pam was in the morning. Okay. But
you said a couple other people had gone through there.
Yep. So previously.
I was. Yeah. So you had the right. In other words, she had something very specific. I know you had something very specific.
You're right.
It was, and I'm not going to ask you about it.
I won't be afraid to say it was a wacky rig Senko. I just won't go into the details. Yeah. So what I was going to say though is, believe it or not, John, I've only fished a wacky rig Senko couple times and never caught anything. And during the classic on Logan Martin, one of my co-anglers was throwing one, and she was like culling and catching, fish after fish. And I'm like, dang it. So I tied on a wacky rig Senko, and I just couldn't get him to bite. And so I was like, I gotta get more familiar with this bait. And so, cause I'm normally Texas rigging a Senko. That's kind of my go-to, but I'm like, dang, these co-anglers are having such success with this. So Ray Hubbard was the first time I've really fished a wacky rig Senko, and it paid off for me. So.
Well, we're supposed to, you're like the smartest person ever. What is going on, Ange? I mean, the learning curve on this stuff for me is really big, really long, really mathematically obtuse. But you telling me you got on a jerk bait and then took second in that tournament, and then you're saying you taught yourself to fish the wacky rig, and then the next tournament you fished, you got a PB. Why don't you teach yourself to build a rocket boat or something?
Yeah, there you go. I don't know. I think just, giving yourself that time on the water and just focusing on the one bait or the one technique for several hours, for me, tends to kind of grill it in, I guess. So.
Well, you certainly, have an eye for it. It takes intuition. It takes observational powers. That's the main thing. I think, the older guys I used to fish with would always just say, just watch me. I think they were kind of at a loss for words when it came to putting things that came natural to them to try and teach. They weren't good teachers. They were fine to fish with. They were very successful, but they weren't exactly somebody who could show you. So you really had to sit there and try to see what they meant when you watch. And, but some people just kind of pick it up out of the air.
Well, and I'll interject to that a little bit. So on Ray Hubbard, we talked about this on the Women's World of Fishing Monday Night Takeover when we interviewed Pam Martin Wells, who won that tournament. We both started kind of in the same spot in the morning, and she was on one side of the wall, I was on the other, and we were kind of trolling down that wall, almost like mirror image, except she was on the outside, which was a totally different situation than what was going on the inside. And
oh yeah, I heard that. She was on the other side of the wall. She said she could have spit on you if she wanted to. You were that close.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, the wind was blowing my direction, so I would have carried it far enough. But yeah, she was throwing a crankbait, and I was, really studying her because she is one of the most, winningest women anglers in bass fishing history. And so you got to believe if I'm near her, I'm watching everything she's doing because, I didn't spend enough. I only fished one tournament as a co-angler, so I never had the opportunity to fish the back of the boat with Pan Martin Wells. And so I'm going to take every opportunity I can to learn, what I can from her. And so I was definitely paying a lot of attention to exactly what she was doing. And she kept saying in our interview, she was just doing something really specific. And I kind of have a feeling in my mind, I don't want to give away her secrets, but I think I know what she was referring to when she was saying that.
Right on, right on, right on. All right. So what we're getting to is basically it's pretty easy to know what to use when bass give affirmation, smash and strike after smash and strike. But you and I know they're not always that enthused. I mean, we've talked about that just now. And so sometimes no matter what we throw at them, they turn their nose up. So, and you were talking about how you can have one angler doing something technique wise that's other anglers, even though they're using the same bait or a similar bait, or not getting the results. So let's break down a decision to change a lure. Let's break down your decision to change a lure. So let's say you've thrown, let's just say, I know green pumpkin's your favorite. You're not alone. Everybody loves a green pumpkin Senko. I know I've got a million of them too. And you've done it now. You've Texas rigged it. You've wackied it. You maybe even neckoed it or something else. And you're just like, oh, I got nothing but a tap. And that was probably a bluegill. So you decide to make a change. Now I want you to put these in order because there's, three basic ways to make a change. You can either just change color in the same bait. You can change to a different bait in the same category, like go for a lizard or something instead of a Senko, or you just go to a whole new category, like, to heck with soft plastics today. I'm going to grab a wire bait, a spinner bait or something like that, or I'm going to grab a hard bait, a jerk bait or a Big O or something like that. So which one of those do you jump right to the radical, or do you go more gradually? Tell me about it.
That's a area I'm still really learning in. And I think it really bit me on Cane River last year because, with the water temps, it was like 90 degrees. The air temp was like 114 with humidity. And I fished that entire week and did not get a single fish, believe it or not. Like, I'm not even a bluegill. Like, we're not just talking bass here, like nothing. I did lose one that was wrapped around a dock pole on the first day of the tournament, which really, really, really hurt me.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And it was a big one too. Come to find out, I think the ladies that were finding success, I was thinking with water temp being so high, really subtle finesse. So I was throwing my Senkos, some Ned rigs, stuff like that. And I think the ones that were having success were like throwing really big, like 10-inch worms. And it never even crossed my mind to try a huge worm like that. But I'll say I think I am learning. This last tournament on Percy Priest here, for example, I was throwing I think a 6-inch or 5-inch robo worm, I think a 6-inch on a shaky head for part of the day. And I've missed probably 3 fish that felt like they were just biting the tail of the worm. And so when that happens, I think maybe I should go a little shorter, make them dial in more closer to the hook and throw like a Ned rig, like a shorter, one of those Zoom TRD baits.
Absolutely. I there's always strategies there. Like, this is just a question to kind of get us going back and forth, because in that situation, also a color change. I think, well, if you move from something subtle, just going from green pumpkin to say watermelon, something crazy like that, just getting a little red fleck in there or some black fleck or something else, just something, a subtle change. Of course, yeah, could be the length, could be And that's something I didn't have in your list of choices. But yeah, sometimes, if you're talking about jerkbaits or Rapalas, slim minnows and stuff, if you're fishing a 3.5 inch and they want a 3 inch or a 2 3/4 inch, they will just kind of swat and swipe at it. They get up to it and they're like, that is not quite right for the, the size bait I'm after. And throwing back into that Cane River thing, the gals that had the best success too, found a little cooler water coming in off some seep and springs and little streams or what have you. So now, chances are, I guess, from the way the scenario tab played out, you were on about trying to find lethargic bass that are kind of hanging out in a non-feeding mood. Like I say, you can fish over 100 bass. They don't want to feed. Go off and find 10 bass that want to feed. And sometimes, but.
And what Pam Martin Wells found was she dialed in on a certain type of grass on that river, which wasn't anything I had enough experience with at that point. So.
Well, of course, I mean, that was your first season. You still did remarkably well. And of course, I listened to anything you put out with Pam in it. So I know it was eelgrass, and she confessed the pattern on the air in the public, everyone. I'm not telling her secrets now. She's happy to share with 90% of what she knows, and she's perfectly entitled to keep the rest in her pocket because she's still out there competing. But yeah, and so her whole thing was a beautiful scenario on how to get into a pattern, because she, she started off with a big spot, and then she started the areas where she thought she was catching, and then she came down to the final conclusion as to why. So you're saying, change size perhaps might be your first option. And what does it take for you to just give up on a whole category of baits? Like plastics just aren't working today, or square bills just aren't working today. No hard bait seems to be the answer.
For me, I'll try a little bit of everything, especially in practice. And so I just kind of use that information, what I get from practice. Cane River was tough because I wasn't getting any information at all. But most of the time I get something. So like, I think it was North Carolina, Lake Hickory. I had pretty good luck during practice on some square bill crankbaits. And so that kind of gave me the feeling that they were maybe kind of reacting, because it's a little faster moving bait, and I was getting some reaction strikes, but they were also on beds there spawning. And so of course, in that scenario, you're throwing a really finesse type bait to try to get them to react to that. So it's just observing, I guess, the situation where you're at, what's going on. The crankbait bite I was getting was off the docks. And of course, the beds were on like shallow gravel flat type areas. So it's just lots of observation.
Well, yeah, and I guess this is a classic dumb question for an interview segment, because now that you're talking like a true fisher. There's a lot more that goes into it. I might change color, I might go to a different bait in the same category, or I might change the whole category depending on what the conditions are presenting me and what I think might work and what might work better. So, yeah, you've really got to, size comes into it, time of year comes into it, it all comes into it. But there is a big difference between no taps, no pecks, no nothing, and then you start getting swipes or ticks. And to me, that's where it gets kind of tricky, where you really gotta, it's a lot of times I think it is color or size. And you bring it down or take it up. I'm always, bring it down, smaller. But guys like Marshall Arnwine and our friend Luke Chommings down in Australia and other guys like that, they go the other way. They're like, get bigger. Either make up their mind and, because they aren't going to peck at a lure that's 6, 7, 8, 10 inches long. They're either going to, it kind of drives out the small guys that just are curious, and only things that have made up their mind are going to come after. At least that's their line of thinking.
The other big thing, John, is water clarity. If I'm used to Percy Priest, where we're pretty stained almost year round, really clears up a little bit here and there, and it gets dirtier too, but depending on the weather and rain and whatnot. But some of these lakes I'm fishing now with these tournaments are so clear, and I'm so not used to that. But from everything I've read, when you're in those situations, you want to go with something that's a very natural looking bait. Whereas out here on Percy Priest, I may be throwing something like almost black or almost white, one end or the other.
Absolutely. I mean, we have this lake near me, a reservoir near me called Hillsdale, and We just call that watercolor Hillsdale green, and we kind of design and tie jigs and other baits kind of because that's what we're going to be fishing in. And absolutely, I like to use, color blocks and things like that to fish over at Hillsdale that I would probably not use were I fishing in a clear creek or a more clear lake. So basically what you're saying is, Crappie Hippie, next time you make up a list of dumb questions, and make sure you put size in there. Size and water clarity. I got it. I'll make that under next time I interview Ange. Try to be at least half as smart as she is, and get some better choices. All right, because you've run rings around me in my alleged cleverness. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying, and it's really encouraging to me because I like to finesse fish for bass, and I know you do too, and spin fish for them and stuff. I mean, there's nothing wrong. I wish I was better at a casting reel. I enjoy using it, but I don't know, just something about the way I fish. I like that at 16th, 8th ounce, quarter ounce range, and you get bigger than that, and I start getting out of my comfort zone. We talked a bit about Hubbard. Let's go ahead and talk about what's coming up. Caddo Lake, am I saying that right? Caddo Lake?
Yeah, I think it's Caddo, Shreveport area, Louisiana.
Yeah,
Never
right
been there before.
Me neither.
Couple ladies on the tour. I think they're kind of their home area. But we always have the curse of the home lake, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything one way or the other.
Oh, yeah, you're talking to a guy that watched the Chiefs lose at home in the championship. So I know that home advantage is kind of a myth. But anyway, what an interesting lake. It's a little south of Arkansas, a little northwest of Shreveport. Yeah, it's a fascinating lake. It was created by a giant flood. So it is a natural lake. Because it was happened in a flood, it was a cypress forest before it got flooded. And so there's still a lot of bald cypress trees in the lake, I understand. And the cypress have the knees that they form to help keep them steady and stable in that water. Now, you and I talk a lot about your tournaments are always on these giant lakes. Any lake is fishable if you can break it down into manageable pieces. And that's what I was kind of hoping to talk about tonight. You're going to be there right at the beginning of May. So can you give us a little of your strategy?
Yeah, well, my biggest thing, first of all, is just never having been there before, kind of learning how to run the boat on that lake. Pam Martin Wells kind of alluded to it in our interview the other night, in that it's kind of sketchy. I mean, you're running down, they've got boat lanes marked, but you're looking and seeing these trees and whatnot right there. And so I don't expect I'm going to get out there and start ripping at 60 miles an hour right away.
I better not hear about you doing that kind of foolishness. I've heard enough about that. Like, I've been doing a little reading, and they say, oh yeah, read the water level and know what you're doing before you get in there. Cause if it's down 6 inches, you better know about it.
Yeah. It's average 4 feet deep is what they said on the Lady Bass Anglers Association information I was reading. So, and I've got a 23-foot bay reef. And so my biggest concern is just kind of navigating that big of a boat in between all these trees. So that's kind of the first thing I'm going to focus on and figure out, and probably, like you said, kind of dial in one area that I really want to focus on and just really learn every square inch of that area. That's kind of my thought process going into it. The good thing is there's several campgrounds right on that lake. So kind of like I did in Logan Martin, I'm going to pick a campground and hopefully be able to keep the boat right there on the water, which will make it really easy to get out there and practice early and stay out there late. And so I can really put in the time I need to try and figure it out. And without having done a ton of research yet, I'm thinking, sounds like you're really just casting, it's a number of casts, almost like musky fishing, the fish 10,000 casts. Like, I think I'm going to be casting at a lot of trees all day long.
Well, that's what I've read as well, and it sounds like a great strategy. And they talk about channels and this and that, and the emergent veg. They have a lot of lily pads or lotus pads and some milfoil and so on. So I guess it's just a matter of seeing how far into the spawn transition they are and kind of getting that down in practice and then going for it as much as possible. I can't really talk to you a lot about tournament fishing because outside of doing it when I was a teenager with the the local Olathe Fishing Club. I haven't done any, so I can't pretend to know the one strategy in that. What time do y'all have to be back in for weigh-in, for example?
It depends on the time of year as far as sunrise, because we can't take off until safe light. So it's usually around like 3 or 3:30, somewhere's in there, depending on the time of year.
And what time do you take off? Right at first light, so whatever.
They try to start sending us off at whatever the posted like sunrise time is for that day. Sometimes we might be a little delayed. It just depends on the whole situation, the setup. Like at Ray Hubbard, we had to do it a little differently this year than we did last year. We actually did our ceremony right there in the parking lot of Bass Pro Shop. And then everybody drove over to the ramp and launched in order. And we took off that way. Whereas the year before, we launched and had all our boats already in the water over there in front of Bass Pro and did our opening ceremony there. But I have to give a huge shout out to the tournament director, Larry Valentine. He did an amazing job. Everything ran super smoothly, and they just do really good at planning different scenarios and situations. So, and he also called the second day of Ray Hubbard. We didn't really talk about that, but typically our tournaments are 2-day tournaments. And this year we had some pretty sketchy weather conditions coming in for day 2 at Ray Hubbard. And so Larry made the call to cancel it because they were calling for like 30, 40 mile an hour wind gusts. And on that lake, in that situation, it can be very, very dangerous. And so, and he knows, my first experience with the LBA was at Truman Lake in Missouri. And that was a pretty rough tournament as far as weather went as well. And these ladies, they're all out there fishing hard. And he knew that if we went with day 2, that everyone would go out and fish. And so, we just didn't want to jeopardize anybody's safety. And so that was a good call there.
Definitely a good call. And it's great to have a guy like Larry who has the experience and the wisdom. Thing falls right in place because running events is no picnic. And when it's done right, you don't even notice it. So it's kind of a thankless job too, because the more they notice, the more things are going wrong and the more things that are not covered that maybe should have been. So that's absolutely great to know. Now, wait a minute. So you had to launch and then take off. So How do you even manage that?
I am very fortunate in that I have a awesome travel partner, Dana Scott, who she handles all that for me. So I don't even have to think about anything. She's an excellent driver, excellent trailer backer upper and all that. And so once she gets me launched, she'll go and help launch other boaters as well. So.
Wow, that is fantastic. So Team Scott getting it done. Yes. All right. And then the cup of love is so overflowing, it even goes over and benefits others. That's fantastic. The way to go, Dana. Appreciate it. It. The hero behind the hero. That's very, very cool. All right. What else can we talk about, Ange? What are we doing here?
Just the rest of the year. So we've got Caddo, we've got Bull Shoals coming up in June, and that's in Missouri, Arkansas. We're launching out of the Arkansas side. I've only been on Bull Shoals one time several years ago, and we hired a walleye guide, me and my dad, and we caught white bass all day. No walleye, but it was still a super fun day. So I, at least have seen that lake before. So that's a good thing. Fishing Gunnersville for the first time with the Team Nashville Bassmasters. So looking forward to that. That's in May. So I guess that's coming up before Bull Shoals. I'm excited to get a taste of Gunnersville. And then our classic again for the LBA is on Logan Martin. So of course, I'm looking forward to going back to Logan Martin, which will be a little later in October. So I think it's going to fish a lot differently than it did last year. And so I'm excited to learn a little bit more about that lake a different time of year.
Absolutely. It sounds super fantastic. Beautiful lakes, destination spots or destination dream spots for so many of us. And you're getting to go. Well, I'm telling you, I expect a lot, Ange, but then I don't think I'm going to be disappointed.
I'm just going to keep doing my best. And that's all you can do, really.
Yeah, it is all you can do, and you keep having fun. I know you guys have a lot of fun, and you keep it fun, and that's a beautiful thing. When people have enough confidence and so forth, enough support and so on, they can go out and compete hard. And I mean, really compete,
Yeah.
and then come in, and the game is over, and the result is the result, and we can all just kick back and relax and enjoy the camaraderie. Hats off to everybody. Much luck in all the tournaments. You're going to be super busy this year. I hope you keep a little bit of time for me here and there, because I sure enjoy talking to you. But anyway, if that's it, I guess we'll get on out of here.
All right. Thanks, John.
Hey, you bet, Angie. Thanks for coming on.